Hi, we're here with Bakari Sellers. We're here for the town hall for Senator Kamala Harris here in Orangeburg, South Carolina, on the campus of South Carolina State University, Smith Hammond Middleton. Bakari, you're moderating the town hall today. How important is it for you to moderate this session for Senator Kamala Harris?
Well, for me, it's a little bit larger than that. It's about exposing my community, my home, to someone who I really believe can be the next president of the United States. In South Carolina, we get a little spoiled with presidential candidates, but I think this is an awesome time to come and learn and touch and be able to ask whatever questions you have of Senator Harris, and even more so offer her prayers and thoughts as we try to make history.
Yeah, we have a long line of people outside, and they're very interested in learning a little bit more about who she is, not necessarily the politics, but they want to get to know who she is as a person. How important do you think that is, and will we get to the bottom of that today?
Well, I don't know about today, but we have a good little bit of time between now and the end of February when the South Carolina primary is, and I think that people are going to grow really familiar and comfortable with Senator Harris. She's somebody who's strong, and as someone like myself who was raised by strong black women, I think that if there is an opportunity to support a black woman who is just as qualified, if not more qualified than the boys, and that's something I'm going to do.
What are you most excited about?
Beating Donald Trump.
Whoa! Beating Donald Trump. What are you hoping Kamala addresses here today?
I hope she'll just give us all kinds of information.
All kinds of information.
Just get to know her.
Exactly, and what her plan is, right? We want some action, don't we?
We want some action soon.
Soon.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about that as well. She's here in Orangeburg. Why do you think the presidential candidates are coming through Orangeburg, South Carolina, and the rural counties?
Well, I think that people would recognize when you look in South Carolina, due to some gerrymandering and some other things, but the heart of the Democratic vote, it runs through the 6th congressional district, between that corridor of 26 between Charleston and Columbia, and what's right there in the heartbeat is Orangeburg. And so we wanted to make sure that we sent Senator Harris over to Holly Hill earlier today. She's here now. We'll bring her back to Denmark and some other places in the future, but I'm pretty certain she'll come back to South Carolina State as well. But this is an awesome opportunity for the citizens of this region to have a little bit of hope.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you, as always.
How are y'all?
Doing good.
What are you hoping to gain from today?
I thought it was important for me to bring my daughter.
Come here, sweetie. Oh, you're beautiful. Tell us your name.
Jayla Garvin.
Jayla Garvin. Do you know what you're attending today?
Sort of.
Sort of, kind of. Who are you seeing today?
Kamala.
Senator Kamala Harris. She's running for what?
President.
And she is a African-American what?
Woman.
Woo! Good. Glad you're here. Definitely a great experience.
Absolutely.
What are you hoping that she covers today?
Just to introduce who she is to the people of South Carolina and Orangeburg, and just to get to meet her in person.
Yeah, learn a little bit more about her, because we got a lot of people to kind of cipher through, don't we?
Absolutely.
Let me start by saying that the way that I will judge the success of our campaign includes that, and really one of the highest grades of our campaign that I will give is whether at the end of this process we are relevant. And the only way that I believe we can ensure our relevancy to the people that we serve is to listen to the people we serve and to be where they live, and not expect people to come knocking on my door, but to come into community and to be here, to be able to hear from community leaders and families. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I've been spending a lot of time around the country, but with an emphasis, especially in South Carolina and other places, on rural communities, many of whom have not ever seen a presidential candidate and deserve to be seen and heard. The issues that I hear about for rural America are very substantial issues. It is about what we need to do to change the way that we are actually designing the system around supporting or not supporting rural communities. Part of the issue is specifically is that we have a design that gives emphasis to large populations. We have a design that gives emphasis to communities that have a tax base. But so many of our rural communities do not have a substantial tax base and do not have large populations, and for that reason do not receive the benefits of the services they need. And we've got to change that, because of course there are families that live in these communities that do need these resources. And so that's part of what I've been doing in terms of traveling around the rural parts of South Carolina.
Senator Harris, I know that you stand with working families, but what about those groups of people who are undervalued, underrecognized? What is your plan to elevate those working families who often don't get the breaks and the support that they need? For instance, caregivers.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, I'll say as a general matter that part of my intention to support working families is the reason that we have come up with what has been described by economists as what would be the most significant middle-class tax cut that the country has seen in generations. And by that, we would give families that are making less than $100,000 a year a tax credit of up to $6,000 a year, that they will receive it up to $500 a month, which will lift up working families and really give them the support they need to get through the month, knowing that almost half of American families are a $400 unexpected expense away from complete upheaval, and we need to close that gap. In terms of what we need to do around caregivers, listen, I am in support of caregivers organizing to be able to fight for the wages and the benefits they deserve. Caregivers are often women of color, who are taking on the responsibility of caring for the youngest and the oldest and the most in need in our families. And when they do that caregiving, they often leave a paying job to do a job that must be performed without any wages or benefits. And we've got to correct course on that, because this is also about economic justice, right? For families that have money, they can hire a caregiver. But in so many of the families that don't have money, it is a family member that becomes a caregiver and otherwise loses opportunity they may otherwise have to have income. If we're going to have a society that is based on what is about supporting families and keeping families intact and supporting what families need to do to care for each other, we need to care for our caregivers, and that should start with paying them a living wage and giving them the benefits they deserve. Absolutely. I have been, my entire life and career, an ally of the LGBTQ community. The issues that are raised about how our laws have treated that community is really a civil rights issue that must be understood and addressed through that lens. We cannot, as a society that pretends to care about justice and equal justice under the law, we cannot tolerate any barrier to access or to equality based on sexual orientation. And there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard. In particular, you mentioned our transgender community, and there's a lot of work still to be done, not only in terms of equal rights, but also to address hate. And the hate that has really, frankly, in our country across all kinds of lines received new fuel in the last couple of years. I feel strongly that we must speak out whenever we see that hate. We must never require anyone who is the subject of that hate to fight alone, because the way that we address these kinds of issues will be a reflection of who we are as a nation. And we cannot be a nation that lets anyone suffer alone without all of us coming together to their defense.
They always throw it to the woman, right?
Yeah, right. First.
Well, hopefully we'll find out what her platform is and what she's going to do for all the people.
Wonderful. What about you, sir?
I'm just looking to hear something, a little different from one politician. I'm just fed up with Trump.
There you go. Understand. We'll get one more fellow. Hello. Then we'll take it from here. Are y'all ready to see Kamala?
Yeah!
Tell us what you're most excited about.
I am just wanting someone who has some common sense.
Okay.
And who will change the direction of this country back to where we care for one another.
Right. Do you think you'll be able to get that in one sitting?
You mean one presidency or one?
Well, one sitting here today.
Oh,
one town hall meeting.
But I can follow her throughout her campaign, and I'll be backing her.
Wonderful.
Throughout.
We are so delighted to have you here at the South Carolina State University. We have the pleasure of having Senator Kamala Harris here, and I want to give her a warm Bulldog welcome. So will my beautiful Bulldogs help me out as we give her a warm welcome? Y'all ready? SC, pump it up, SU. Keep it going. Bulldogs, say what? Now coming onto the stage, we have our very own South Carolina's Bakari Sellers for tonight's moderator. Everybody give a warm welcome for Bakari Sellers.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, Miss Berry. 7th grade teacher over there, Miss Berry. Mr. Gaffney, my mama got all her girlfriends right here. How's everybody doing today? My name is Bakari Sellers. I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. And my mom and dad would always instill in us that the two most important words in the English language are the words thank you. And they are not nearly said enough. And so before we begin today, I want to say thank you to this awesome, awesome university, South Carolina State. I want to say thank you to the president and the board members that are here. I want to say thank you to all of you all who have come out. And I want to say thank you to the next president of the United States Senator Kamala Harris. See if now, my grandmother would say that you can't fall off the floor. And if you look around, it doesn't matter in this country whether or not you're black or Hispanic, immigrant, Muslim, gay. It feels as if we're all on the floor together. And so now it's time that we join hands and look at our neighbors and say that we too can stand up and we can fight back. That we have to have people that fight for freedom. Senator Harris is a fighter for freedom. Freedom from discrimination and freedom from violence. Freedom so that we can drink clean water and breathe clean air. Freedom that all of God's children, no matter what they look like, can survive and thrive. We need a fighter for freedom in this country. We need somebody who can stand up and say that we too deserve to be free. You know, I will tell you all this, that it's not about what this country was or what this country is, it's about what this country can be. And so when I go home and I talk to my mother and I look at my daughters and I talk to my wife, it's very difficult for me to tell them that I am going to support somebody other than Senator Harris, that I'm going to support one of the boys on the stage when I got a black woman who is equally as qualified, if not more than qualified, to be the president of the United States. That we're going to fight for the next president of the United States, a true freedom fighter on these hallowed grounds of South Carolina State University, United States Senator from the great state of California, Kamala Harris.
Bakari Sellers! I want to thank Bakari Sellers publicly because I cannot thank him enough and in private for your leadership.
Thank you, thank you. So I think I get to start with a question or two. I think
Okay.
that's what they told me.
Okay, let's do that.
And then we can do the moderating part.
Okay.
South Carolina State is a very unique institution, like many historically black colleges and universities. In fact, I was a graduate of Felton Laboratory School, which was right across the street over there. And South Carolina State actually provided many of the student teachers and et cetera, and it was a pipeline for many black professionals and many black teachers, not just in South Carolina, but throughout the country. Unfortunately, we're starting to see some drips in that pipeline where we're not seeing individuals who look like me and you in the classroom. And so what are we going to do to make sure that we lift up the Jackson States and the Maryland Eastern Shores and the Howard University?
You know.
I just threw that out there for you.
Couldn't let it
and
go.
the South Carolina States
President Clark.
to make sure that we are still putting people of color in classrooms across this country.
That's right. And when you are in college, that's when you're now beyond your home and the family that you grew up in and the neighborhood and the church you grew up in. You now have choices about who you will choose to have as friends. You have choices about how you're going to study and the issues that you're going to study. And you are in that phase of life where you start to figure out your identity vis-a-vis your world, not just your family and your neighborhood, but your world. And when you're in an environment at an HBCU, everything you are told is that you can be whatever you want to be, and there will be no barriers to that success. And you are told as a young black student that you do not need to make choices and fit into anyone's narrow definition of what it means to be a young black person in America.
The mortality rate of African American women and how they die at higher rates in childbirth, and how that was something that my family went through and something that many women in here go through. Talk about those issues and how you expect to now make this issue that has been a silent killer for black women on the forefront of something that we're talking about throughout public debate.
So I have actually a piece of legislation in the United States Senate based on that priority. And it is born out of this. The facts are really clear. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth than any other population. And when you look at the issue, it doesn't take long for you to figure out that it actually affects black women equally regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of their education level. What it actually comes down to is the sad fact, which is racial bias, that when those women walk into a clinic or a hospital or a doctor's office, their complaints are not taken as seriously. And this is an issue for women generally. Let's look at how we've addressed it in terms of health care as a general matter in our country as it relates to access to health care and health care policy. Let's look at the fact that the Affordable Care Act sought to address one of the disparities as it relates to women in the healthcare system when it comes to pre-existing conditions. Women should not suffer for the fact that God decided that it would be women who have the responsibility for perpetuating the human species, and that our bodies were designed for that very purpose. And so women are going to have specific healthcare needs because of the way our bodies are designed. And we have an administration now in place. When this administration came into place, made it their #1 priority to try and get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which eliminated this ban from pre-existing conditions. Which is why one of my greatest priorities is what we need to do to further improve the healthcare system, because right now cost is still one of the greatest barriers to people being able to have access to the health care that will relieve them of the pain that they may be experiencing or help save their lives, which is why I am supporting Medicare for all.
My issue is this. I lost a wife 12 years ago to cancer because of what you're talking about, limited access, where they raised our monthly premium from $350 a month to $1,000 a month, hoping that I couldn't pay it. Right. I did until the day she passed. The reason for us opening this facility is because we want to make urgent care and primary care led by a black woman affordable for everyone. My focus is this, though. Marijuana, cannabis, is a major issue here in South Carolina now, the medical component. And we stand to implement that within our practice once it becomes legalized. My question to you is this. Where do you stand in the implementation of medical cannabis as it relates to chronic illness?
I have long been a supporter of medical marijuana, and I have personally known people who only benefited from its use. I also believe that we need to legalize marijuana in this country. The criminalization of the use of that drug has led to a disproportionately large number of men of color being incarcerated and criminalized. And it has been disproportionately applied, it is unfair, and it is unnecessary. Part of the reason I also am in favor of legalizing it is we need to change it on the schedule, because to your point and to your wife's point, we need to change it from the Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 so that we can actually, we should change it so that we can study the effects. We know that there are benefits, medical benefits. We also need to be able to study the effect on the human brain, on the forming human brain, 18 to 24. But I will say this, that we have failed in this country to recognize that that war on drugs was an abject failure, and what was essentially and should have been treated as a public health issue became a criminal justice issue and led to mass incarceration of, in particular, black and brown men in this country, and we have got to reform this system. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. But on the greater point, we also have to recognize that for the most part, we have, as a country, a real problem with mass incarceration. And the way that we have dealt, in particular, with drug use has contributed almost entirely to that mass incarceration system, and we need to end it.
We have 4 in college, and I'm going to grad school.
Oh.
The debt is, it'll be 5. The debt is immense, and I think the burden is unfair.
Yeah.
We're just trying to prepare our young people to be professionals and take over. And if you take over with that much debt, it's difficult to get a foothold.
Yeah. So, congratulations on all of the success in your family, and you are absolutely right. South Carolina college graduates graduate with, on average, a $26,000 debt in student loans, and are in the top 10. And this is not a good point of distinction, in the top 10 of the heaviest levels of student debt in our country, and we need to address it. And so part of my proposal is that, one, we need to have a debt-free college. We have to have free community college. We need to allow students to refinance their student loan debt, which right now you cannot do. We need to have a system where your repayment will be a function of your income, and so changing the method of calculating payment so that it is income-based. And we also need to go after the predators, because there are predators in this space who are taking advantage of these students who have this student loan debt and charging them exorbitant rates. And there needs to be, frankly, some responsibility and accountability and consequence for those predators who are preying on our young people who committed the offense of what? Deciding that they wanted to put themselves on a path to increase their education, to increase their productivity, to provide us with our future leadership. And I'll say that a related issue to this is teacher pay. So that teacher pay is one of my big areas of focus. So let's talk a little bit about teachers. I've been traveling our country. I cannot tell you the number of teachers I have met who are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs to pay the bills. Right here in South Carolina included. 94% of the teachers in our country who are teaching in public schools are coming out of their own pocket to help pay for school supplies. And let's be clear about something. There are 2 groups of people who are raising the children of our community. Parents, often with the assistance of grandparents and aunties and uncles, and teachers. But we are not paying our teachers their value. In fact, across this country, teachers are paid on average 10% less than similarly educated college graduates. And we need to close this gap, which is why, as president, I will put in place what will be the first in the history of our country ever federal investment in closing the teacher pay gap. Nationally, that gap is about $13,500 a year. Here in South Carolina, it's about $10,000 a year. And let's be clear about what that means. $10,000 a year is the equivalent of a year's worth of mortgage payments. $10,000 a year is the equivalent of a year's worth of groceries. $10,000 a year is the equivalent of putting a significant dent in student loan debt. And what I want is that these young leaders and smart people, when they are excelling in science and have a passion to go and teach in a middle school, may have to look at the cost of paying off those loans and the cost of living, and instead of going to teach, you have to go work on Wall Street. I don't want you to have to make that choice. And I want to make a fine point on this. I strongly believe that you can judge a society based on how it treats its children. And one of the greatest expressions of love that a society can make toward its children is to invest in their education, and by extension, invest in their teachers and our educational institutions, including our HBCUs.
My name is Charles C. Patton. I'm a junior physics major from Sumter, South Carolina. And my question is, it is well known that those who identify within the LGBTQIA+ community have always been and continue to be overwhelming targets of hate crimes in this nation, without accurate resources put in place to receive righteous justice. If elected president, Senator Harris, what will you do to ensure that the violence ensued upon those in the community, especially Black women of the trans experience and gender nonconforming folks, does not continue, and if and when it does happen, righteous justice is served, as well as the laws prosecuting those who participate in sex work as a means to feeding themselves due to discriminatory policies hindering them from receiving any other work?
So let's start by saying that we have to speak truth, that issues born out of hate are very real in our country, including homophobia, transphobia, and then, of course, we know racism and anti-Semitism and sexism and on. And we must speak truth about these issues to the point of you raising the subject. We must speak and agree that it is born out of hate, hate which recently, in the last couple of years, has received new fuel. Let us all agree that as a community, we must step up and we must speak out whenever we see those instances of hate, and we must all agree that whoever is the subject of that hate should never be made to fight alone. Let's speak that truth. I have my entire life and career been an ally of the LGBTQ community. I, as Attorney General, refuse to defend what I believe to be a very obviously unconstitutional law, Prop 8 in California, that would have denied same-sex couples the right to marry. I believe it is a civil rights issue. No population of people in our country should be treated differently under the law. So it's just a basic point. But there is still a lot of work to do. And to the point of your question, there is work to do that is about, one, as a president of the United States, I will tell you, and I fully intend to win, let me tell you that too. Understanding, because this is really important, because over the last couple of years we've learned that we can't take certain things for granted. My priority would be to, one, use the power of my office as an executive to make sure we're enforcing the laws, especially wherever bias and hate take form, and it would be to elevate public discourse around these issues. So I thank you for that.
My question to you is kind of twofold. One, it is, as president, what would you do to put pressure on states who are essentially really behind the curve to have hate crime legislation? And then also, what would you do about guns and the crimes that are committed that are fueled by hate using guns to close those loopholes?
That's right. The tragedy that occurred there was fueled by hate, and it was just yet a most recent example of the fact that we still have a lot of work to do in this country, and that I agree with you, connected to the last point. The truth is that racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, these are things that are real in our country, and we must speak it if we are going to deal with it. And we have got to have leaders who do not fuel the fire, but instead speak it out in a way that we can heal and address what has come out of it, including making sure there's consequence and accountability for anybody who commits these crimes, because they are crimes. That being said, on the issue of guns, it is a false choice to suggest you are either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. And we need to have leaders in our country who have the courage to speak that truth. And frankly, we are lacking in leadership at the highest levels who have the courage to speak that truth. We need leaders in Washington, D.C. who have the courage to speak the truth, not only that that is a false choice, but to have the courage to say, hey, you know what, you want to go hunting, that's fine. But there is no need for us to overlook the necessity of having reasonable gun safety laws in this country, which include universal background checks and a renewal of the assault weapons ban. Let's speak that truth. Before someone can buy a lethal weapon, if they've been found by a court to be a danger to themselves or others, you might just want to know that. You might just want to know. You might just want to know before someone can buy a lethal weapon if they have committed a violent act. You might just want to know. That's a good idea. Universal background check, that's a good idea. Renewal of the assault weapons ban. Let's talk about that. We are talking about a weapon that has been designed to rapidly fire in a way that can kill as many people as quickly as possible. That's the design of an assault weapon. We might want to say that in a civil society, there is no need for weapons of war to be easily available and purchased. That's just reasonable. So we're not waiting for good ideas, we've had those. We're not waiting for tragedies because we've had those. And we are meeting everyday people who have personally grieved through incredible loss because of those tragedies. So what are we waiting for? We're waiting for people to have the courage to act. We're waiting for people in the United States Congress to have the courage to act. And that's why I say elections matter. That's why elections matter, because we need to vote people in office on this issue who have the courage to act.
My question really is around what are your views on technology, something akin to the general data protection regulation for the U.S., because that a lot of the bullying and everything that we are seeing is actually being done online. So just that's.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
There is no question that we need greater regulation of the technology industry. There's no question at all. In particular, we need greater protections as it relates to privacy. And, let's be clear about this. One of the most valuable things that we all have right now is our personal identifying information. Right now, we have a system that, without the appropriate protections in place, allow technology companies to have an incredible amount of your personal information without much external regulation on what they do with it and how they use it, and whether they even inform you about the fact that they are collecting it. And we've got to fix that, because as far as I'm concerned, I want you as the consumer to be fully informed, and then you give permission about what you are willing to give up or not, as opposed to it being taken from you as though it's their property when it's your property. So you think about anything you have in your house, that's your private stuff, right? That's your private business. And so we have put in place rules around privacy as it relates to your personal stuff in a physical construct. So now, so much of what is valuable to you is your data, is the information that you share when you're talking to people on Facebook or through your cell phone or in these credit card purchases or the online purchases you make. You know where all that stuff is? It's in the cloud. Well, what protection are you putting in place in the cloud for your stuff? And what rules are there around protecting your stuff in the cloud? And so essentially that's part of the problem, which is we need to have in place rules around, look, you're in my stuff. You're going through my business. And we need to have rules around how far you can get into my business without my permission or knowledge. So essentially, that's it. And then we can get into a more technical discussion of what should be in place. But that's how I come at a lot of this, which is it's about privacy, it's about abuse of privacy, it's about misuse of personal information.
Senator Harris, thank you so much for coming to South Carolina.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk very briefly about art and education.
Oh, that's a good question.
all of the things that you've discussed this afternoon with hate crimes and all the rest of it can all be translated to public education.
I agree.
And there doesn't seem to be a platform today in government for that. More and more children are being kept away from the arts, both the fine, the performing, and the visual arts. And so the things that they need to discuss, or things that the emotions and feelings they need to have, are not being expressed. So what you're getting is people who are lopsided, so to speak, who don't have a full education. How would you as president, or when you become president, what can we do as a nation to help fuel this, to go back and to be concerned with art and education?
And, you know, part of the point, you know, there's a lot of talk about STEM, and we need to invest in STEM, science and technology and engineering and math. But many of us talk about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because we are lacking there. And I couldn't agree with you more. I actually went to a fine arts school for part of my education. And the importance of our young people, our children, our youth, being able to find ways to express themselves in nonverbal ways is so important. And it is also about opening our minds to the creative approaches and creative thought. And so for so many reasons this is important, and it is absolutely right. We have stopped funding in our public schools music and arts, and to our detriment. Part of the challenge there is that we have got to, as a general matter, put this in the context of what we need to do to have a national priority around public education in our country. That includes not only paying our teachers, but thinking about how we are funding school districts. One of the issues that comes up repeatedly when I'm in South Carolina is what is happening around the lack of funding for schools, and in particular in rural communities. Because we have a structure, and this is actually in many states around the country, we have a structure where, now frankly, it just doesn't make any sense, where the funding of a school district is going to be based in large part on the tax base of that community. Well, so the tax base, if it's low, it also tends to be the same community that is the highest in need, but with the fewest of resources. And so we've got to really examine what we're doing around funding and then a distribution of resources within the curriculum. And arts has to be a vital part of that. As president, part of what I would do on day one is get a new Secretary of Education. Because let's be clear about what's happening under this administration. They're trying to talk about grizzly bears and putting guns in the hands of teachers and privatizing education, instead of understanding that the Secretary of Education should be concerned with actually educating our children in the most efficient and effective way. So that would be it on day one. And then looking at our National Endowment of the Arts and looking at all that is available that has proven to us that a robust education includes a robust support of the arts. So I appreciate the point you made.
I guess as we wrap this up, I want to kind of end by saying thank you, but even more importantly, I want to ask this audience that we have here for three things while you're actually here. I ask that you make sure that you keep Senator Harris in your prayers. We are a very prayerful community here in the South. I mean, we have our faith and we hold on to it extremely tight, and so I ask that all of you all keep her in your prayers. I ask that you give what you can. And what I mean by that is give your energy, your time, your resources, your sweat equity. And sometimes that means having those water cooler conversations. And then when it's time, I need your vote, because that's what we're here for. We got a little bit of time between now and then, but all of you all here know how to vote. I think, ladies and gentlemen, if she's going to be back. Don't worry about that.
Yes, I will.
But please give her a round of applause and say thank you to the next President of the United States Senator Kamala Harris.
Thank you.